Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and you guys know what time it is. It's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community, and I just saw a video come through my feed by no other than OmarIsuf, shaman and philosopher from Canada, the cold northern land. And he said, guys, you don't have to have perfect form to progress. And in this case, I'm actually going to agree with Omar. So let me go ahead and put on my +5 hat of speechcraft, lovingly called my +5 hat of autism by many of you, and let's talk about this. Now, this is going to be one of these videos where I essentially agree with Omar. There are times when I'm very critical of certain things Omar says, particularly the trendy stuff he's done lately. I'm critical of some things he says. This one I'm not. And I'm going to agree, and he makes some very valid points. And what people need to understand, there's several different philosophies in strength and conditioning circles around all of this. And among coaches and athletes and everyone else. Now, he kind of pointed out that, look, we need to be aware of our form. And that is true. We do need to be aware of our form. However, there is a certain school of thought in elite strength and conditioning circles that you really don't. It doesn't matter. Just get strong. Fix your weak links and you won't get hurt. And there are people say that's crazy. Well, it sounds crazy, but there are also world record holders who never get hurt who follow that philosophy. I'm not saying that's the best way, just pointing out that that is an existing philosophy, and there are people who never get hurt, who compete at elite levels, who do follow that mindset. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it, but we need to understand that it does exist. So what Omar kind of pointed out is that, look, in the perfect world, we would all get amazing coaching from day one, and we would learn good form, and we would progress from there. And what I will say, in a perfect world, that still wouldn't work. You would need to hire an elite coach for you the rest of your life. Like, in a perfect world, you would have a world-class level coach you from now and every workout for the next 30 years. Why? Because your form is going to degrade. Your form is going to degrade at some point, no matter how perfect it is right now. And that might be difficult for some people to grasp. But that's reality. If you're a serious lifter, that is going to happen. And we can get into why in a minute. Now, some of what he's talking about is that he's talking about not so much just form breakdown, but he's talking about efficient levers. Like Omar talked a lot about, look, it's not required that you get everything perfect. It's just not. That you don't need to just stall and not make progress and stick with 135 on the bar forever till you get your form perfect. And I agree with that. And the problem is that you have certain people who almost promote that you need to do that. I mean, like Athlete X. And that's why all of the people he works with tend to be really, 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 really fucking weak. Exactly for that reason, guys like Jesse. But in the real world, that's not going to work. You will stall for the rest of your life and never make gains if you get caught up in that mindset of being so focused upon that you never progress. And you'll actually see form Nazis online will come and tell people, no, you need to fix this form. You need to reduce the weight way down till you fix this form. And it would be one thing if you literally don't know how to perform an exercise. But if it's a muscle issue or something else, you really, really cannot afford to stop progressing. Now, you might cut that variation out and do a different variation of an exercise that might correct it, that will allow you to keep progressing, right? You could do a close variation of that style of squat or that deadlift. You could do something that will let you work on the motor patterns and the form that will still allow you to lift very heavy and progress. That's something you could do. But you can't stop progressing to fix minor form issues unless you simply do not know how to perform the lift correctly. And with a novice, a lot of times we might recommend that if they just flat don't know how to bench press and they're cheating the weight up and flopping around on the bench, like you take someone who comes over to the bench and they've worked up to where they're doing 200 pounds, but you watch what they do and they just dive bomb it, bounce it off their chest. They're on the bench like a big floppy noodle, and then their ass shoots an ass up into the air off the bench, and then they lock it out. Okay, that person probably needs to restart with the empty bar. But he's not made that much progress because he's probably fairly weak. He's probably fairly weak. That guy is legitimately like a 120-pound bench presser. He could be back to where he is if he didn't train, if he just came back to the gym for 6 weeks, if he took 6 months off. He's still a noob, right? So you have the people like that. They could probably restart, but for everyone else, it's just not a viable option. It isn't, unless it's just that bad and you're still weak and they're cheating excessive amounts of weight. So normally what we would recommend is say, okay, work on correcting your form. Now, if it's a technique issue, it might be a case of you need to reduce the weight slightly and work on technique. Okay, fair enough. If you're having some technical breakdown, which is again leverage, what Omar's talking about is energy bleeds, which means your body position is incorrect, right? Body position is incorrect because that's one source of form breakdown. There's another source that's going to be muscle weaknesses as far as your kinetic chain, and that's on bigger, more complex movements, whether it's the bench press or the overhead press or a squat. That's a different situation. What he's talking about is bar path related. It has to do with technique, mental cues, foot placements, all sorts of things, right? If it's something that you can correct through adjusting your form, then by all means, reduce the weight slightly, reduce the weight by 10%, and focus upon correcting your technique. Be aware of it, but you don't stop lifting heavy because of it. You just adjust and then progress from there. Minor adjustments, and just be more mindful of it. And work on different mental cues to help you fix that, whether it's learning to get tighter in certain ways, whether it's worrying about keeping your neck neutral, whether it's worried about keeping your scapula retracted, whether it's a mental cue on the deadlift, such as pulling back. Right, there's a lot of different things that we can do on these lifts. But that's only one example. What about when it's a muscle weakness? Well, what always happens when you fail a lift? Not every time, because sometimes you're just not strong enough to complete another rep. You reach failure in a set, or you fail the max lift. He talks about form breakdown. Well, form breakdown doesn't always happen on max lifts. There are people who break world records with beautiful form that looks like a warm-up. We've all seen it happen. Others, it's really, really ugly. But usually what's going on, there's a muscle weakness. In other words, one muscle usually gives out before something else. Usually if you fail a squat, or you fail a bench press, or you fail an overhead press, there is a muscle somewhere that gives out. If you see the form degrade when you fail instead of the weight just dropping, right? That's a perfect example. If you're squatting and you just fold over like a taco on rep 7 and the first 5 looks really good, that's indicative of a muscle weakness, right? One specific set of muscles or stabilizers or something gave out. And if something is giving out, that's your weak link in the exercise. And it's the same thing when you've hit a max. So doesn't it look the same? Usually if you go to hit a max lift and the form breaks down and you fail it, or the form breaks down and you get it, doesn't it look pretty much the same as the last rep on a set to failure? Whether it's the final rep that you grind out, which will look exactly like your max, right? That'll look like your max that you make that's grindy and ugly. Or if you just flat fail and the form breaks down instead of the weight just dropping. Because the latter is due to overall fatigue. You just weren't strong enough and you were fairly well balanced and your technique was good. You just weren't strong enough to lift it. You just got pinned under the weight. Versus the form shifts and breaks down and then you fail. Well, it looks the same when you hit a set to failure. Like if you go to do your 8 rep max and you go for rep 9 and it fails and you see that form breakdown, we now can spot a weak muscle in there. Right? We have a weak muscle, and if we can identify the weak muscle, we can train that weakness. And there's different ways to train that weakness. In some cases, it's a movement pattern weakness. It can be trained as a movement pattern. In other cases, it's simply a strength issue for a given muscle. So how do we fix that in that case? Well, with special exercises, right? If it is a movement pattern weakness, we can usually fix it with an assistance movement, right? You can fix it with an assistance movement. So if you're really weak at the bottom of bench press, you go to hit a bench press and you fail and it just sticks on your chest. Okay, we know that your chest is a weak link in the bench. You could do more pause benching. You can maybe work on something that gives you a deep stretch reflex on the chest, like some heavy dips. If you have a big enough chest to get low enough, maybe a floor press, dead stop floor presses, right? There's stuff like that you could do. We could fix that movement pattern. If it's maybe some excessive thoracic rounding happening on a squat, you could maybe do some safety bar squats or other exercises that make you work harder at that point where it's trying to pull you over so that you strengthen the muscles through that movement pattern. Your other option is accessory movements. Well, what are accessory movements? Accessory movements are hypertrophy exercises for different muscles. If your chest is a weak link in the bench press, you could do some specific hypertrophy work for your chest. If your triceps are weak link, you work on your triceps. If your quads are making you miss your squats, do some additional quadricep work. If your abs are causing you to miss lifts in the squat, do some additional ab work. because size equals strength. And if you do hypertrophy work for any given muscle, that can correct form breakdown that occurs as a result of going too heavy, because heavy is about perceived exertion. Heavy is either too much weight on the bar or it's trying to do too many reps with the same weight. It's the same effect. You're not strong enough to complete the rep with the weight you're trying to lift due to a muscle weakness somewhere. One of your muscles is giving out. And if that happens, you can correct that with special exercises, right? You get stronger in that area, and then your technique will improve. But what we need to remember is that there's a difference. There's two different forms of bad form. There's a bad form that's just bad technique and energy bleeds, and it has to do with moment, arms, and levers, and it's going to occur on every rep that you do. And that can be fixed, again, by learning your technique better and being mindful of it. And then you have muscle weaknesses and movement pattern weaknesses, which usually don't manifest until you get close to muscle failure or until you go to hit a max. And that's when they manifest. Singles, they need to be over 90% before they appear. Or you need to be within one rep of failure. And then those start to appear. And those can be corrected with special exercises. So fixing your form is about those two. But here's the thing. You don't stop progressing or lifting heavy to fix your form. You have to keep training. All right, guys. So that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative. And I will talk to you guys next time.